Hello everyone, today we're going to be doing a deck tech for Atraxa Superfriends. Atraxa is a Flying Vigilance, Death Touch, Lifelink 4/4 with, at the beginning of your end step, Proliferate. Also, Atraxa is 4 mana, every color but red. So we'll talk about Atraxa Superfriends. So the game plan is basically to play as many Planeswalkers as we can and hope to use their ultimate effects, which I'll refer to as ults, to win the game. Atraxa is kind of the ideal commander for this, mainly because she is able to proliferate on our end step, making our Planeswalkers get to their big minus and ult effects faster and easier. And aside from Planeswalkers, we are also a proliferating deck. Our proliferate effects will not only help our walkers, but also our other counter effects and counter kind of abilities in general. So to start with our spice, we have Darksteel Reactor with a 4 mana indestructible artifact. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may put a charge counter on Darksteel Reactor, and then when it has 20 or more charge counters on it, you win the game. So think about it like this. Basically, Darksteel Reactor, we will go to our upkeep, we will put a charge counter on it. Then we will go to our end step and put another charge counter on it when we proliferate with Atraxa. So basically, this card is to put a little fun win condition to put our opponents on an indestructible 10-turn clock. Next, Simic Ascendancy is a 2 mana win condition that says, hey, pay 3 mana, put a 1/1 counter on target creature. Whenever one or more 1/1 counters are put on a creature you control, put that many growth counters on Simic Ascendancy. And then on your upkeep, if you have 20 or more growth counters, you just straight up win the game. Now, the cool thing about this card is not only are we going to be proliferating the 1/1 counters, but we will also be proliferating the growth counters that we put on Simic Ascendancy. Kind of speeding up the clock, kind of twofold, even maybe fourfold. I'm not really good at math, but it's going to be a lot where we're basically, I'd say, speeding it up by 4 or so every single turn. Next, we have Classic Doubling Season as a 5 mana enchantment. Don't worry about the top effect, but if an effect would place 1 or more counters on a permanent you control, it places twice that many of those counters on that permanent instead. So basically, our Planeswalkers enter with the loyalty counters. So when they enter, their loyalty counters will kind of be doubled, and then most likely we'll be able to pop their old effect or their big minus effect right away. The same kind of logic is with Vorinclex, 6 mana, 6/6 with Trample Haste. He's just kind of the Doubling Season effect on a body. And then he also has the ability, if an opponent would put 1 or more counters on a permanent or player, they put half that many of each of those counters on that permanent instead, rounded down. So basically, it kind of hurts our opponent's counters. If they put just a 1/1 on something, they just don't even get it because it's rounded down. So we have Big Scary Walkers. I wanted to separate these 3 Big Scary Walkers because these are our big 3, our big bad boys. Starting off, we have big mana, 8 mana, Ugin, the Spirit Dragon. He has a +2 that just says bolt whatever you'd like. And then the main reason to run him is his -X effect, which is a giant exile nuke that hits everything but colorless cards that is X or less. So we save our artifacts, but we're getting rid of kind of everything else that we kind of get to pick the CMC for. Then we have his -10, which is you gain 7 life, draw 7 cards, then put up to 7 permanent cards from your hand on the battlefield. If that doesn't say win the game, I don't know what does. Now, aside from winning the game, let's look at restarting the game. Karn Liberated is a big 7 mana, 6 loyalty walker. He has a +4 ability that says target player exiles a card from his or her hand. His main reason to run him is -3 ability is just exile target permanent. You get rid of anything you don't like. Then we have his -14 ability, restart the game, leaving an exile all non-aura permanent cards exiled with Karn. Then put those cards on the battlefield under your control. So he's kind of there for the removal. He's just kind of a threat people don't like to deal with, but he couldn't restart the game if we really are in a pickle. And with that big +4, he's going to be really hard to beat down. It's going to make our opponents want to attack him just to kind of get him out of the way, because gaining 4 loyalty every turn is kind of a big deal. Next, we have Teferi, Hero of Dominaria for 3 in Azorius. He has a +1, draw a card. At the beginning of your next end step, untap 2 lands. So you can kind of look at him as a 3 mana walker when he comes in, and he does basically give you counterspell mana every time while also drawing you cards. Pretty good cantrip in a way. Then we have his -3, put target non-land permanent into its owner's library, 3rd from the top. So it can't hit lands like Karn, but putting it 3rd from the top messes up our opponent's draws and kind of gives us some time to deal with it. Then his -8, you get an emblem with whenever you draw a card, exile target permanent an opponent controls. Think about it. At the very worst, we draw 1 card each turn. So we get his ult. At the very worst, on each of our turns, we draw a card, we exile a permanent for free. Not non-land permanent, permanent. And if we're drawing more cards with wheel effects or other our Planeswalker draw effects, it's going to get crazy and basically win us the game. No one wants to deal with that. It's not necessarily a win the game card, but if your opponents aren't scooping to that effect, then they're pretty delusional. So now let's go into our removal planeswalkers. These are our planeswalkers with removal effects, as the title might suggest. So since a lot of our abilities are through our planeswalkers, we're not running many instants or sorceries to kind of deal with our opponent's problems. We're kind of relying on our planeswalkers to do so. So starting off, we have Garruk, Cursed Huntsman, as a 6-mana planeswalker. We have him with a 0 to create two wolf tokens, and then whenever they die, you put a loyalty counter on each Garruk you control. Not just him, each Garruk you control. Then we have his -3 effect, destroy target creature, draw a card. Good removal, good card draw. Then we have his -6. You get an emblem with creatures you control have +3/+3 and have trample. That's some good overrun. Now I'm sure you fellow standard players might see, you basically play Garruk, you 0 him, you make the 2 wolves, you let one die somehow, and then you do his big -6 effect to basically have overrun for the rest of the game. Super annoying planeswalker to deal with. Free 2/2/2s every turn. Kind of bothersome. Plus he's just good removal. So, classic Oko, Thief of Crowns, 3-mana planeswalker. +2 him, create a food token. Probably never going to do that, but you +1 him. Target artifact or creature loses all abilities and becomes a green elk creature with base power and toughness, 3/3. So basically, anything you don't like, you just +1 it. That's now a 3/3, assuming it's an artifact or a creature. Your opponent's commander is just a 3/3 elk. Just a big scary artifact like an Immortal Sun or whatever. Nope, just a 3/3. Now we have his ult effect, but we're really not going to use it. It's kind of a big flaw from the design team. So the way this card was supposed to work, some fun Magic trivia, was basically you +2 him to make a food token, and then you do his big minus effect to exchange control of your food token and then just a good artifact or small creature your opponent has. That was the way they looked at him. But people decided to play him the correct way, which is targeting artifacts or creatures your opponents control and just making them useless 3/3s. Super good value. Next, Ajani Unyielding. 6 mana. +2 him, reveal the top 3 cards of your library, and then put all non-land permanent cards revealed this way into your hand. So he basically is going to get us our artifacts, planeswalkers, creatures, and enchantments. He's just not getting lands, instants, or sorceries. That's kind of it, but still, +2ing him to dig 3 deep and most likely drawing 3 because we're not running much of the others aside from the 36 lands we're running. Usually going to be a hit. Then we have his -2. Exile target creature, its controller gains life equal to its power. This is just a flat-out Swords to Plowshares on a commander. Very good effect. And if we can get his ult effect going on, -9, put 5 1/1 counters on each creature you control and 5 loyalty counters on each other planeswalker you control. That card basically says you win the game. Flat out. If you have other planeswalkers, you're going to ult them too. If you have any kind of board state, they're still going to get 5 toughness bigger, and then they're going to get proliferated on your end step with Atraxa anyways. Just a big effect. Next, Elspeth's Sun's Champion for a 6-mana walker. You +1 her to get 3 1/1s, which is kind of ridiculous. Then you can also just -3 her right out the gate. Destroy all creatures with power 4 or greater. Yeah, the downside is it's going to kill Atraxa if she's out. But I mean, usually if you got a nuke, you got a nuke. Like, you're not going to be worried about your one creature. You're not nuking to kill, just like a token or whatever. You're nuking to kind of reset the game a little bit. And then her -7 just says creatures you control get +2/+2 and have flying. It's a good emblem, but the main reason we're running her is 1, the nuke, 2, you get 3 1/1 soldiers, which are going to help block and basically protect our planeswalkers. Continuing on, we have Vraska Relic Seeker for yet another 6-mana walker. She has a +2 that says make a black 2/2 pirate with menace. Good effect, good token, good blocker. Then you -3 her. Destroy target artifact, creature, or enchantment, and then you just make a treasure. So not only does it hit kind of what you need to, pretty much anything that isn't a land or planeswalker, and then you ramp some. Good effect. Then, if you can get her to 10, target player's life becomes 1. Now, that's not a win the game effect, but it for sure is a death sentence. If you go to 1, imagine that. Atraxa is a flying vigilance lifelink death toucher. Pretty hard to block anyways. You got, just with evasion, plus you're making 2/2s with menace. It's basically a death sentence, but it's not necessarily like a win. Next is a little bit younger Vraska for 5 mana. We have a +1 until your next turn. Whenever a creature deal combat damage to Vraska the Unseen, destroy that creature. Basically, you just give her Death Touch. Your opponents aren't going to want to swing into Vraska, and if they do, their creatures are going to die, so it's kind of a win-win either way. Then we have our minus effect. Destroy target non-land permanent. You just get rid of whatever you don't like except a land. Self-explanatory, super good effect. Then if we can get her to 7, create 3 1/1 assassin creature tokens with whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, that player loses the game. Now, it's a very cool and goofy effect, but I think it's a little bit unreliable because they are just 1/1s with no evasion, right? Now, if they were unblockable, that'd be a different story. But again, we're mainly running her for her -3 effect that says destroy target non-land permanent. Just very good removal. So next we have Jace, Unraveler of Secrets for a 5 mana from Shadows over Innistrad. You +1 him, you scry 1, draw a card. Good card advantage. That's really good for a plus. Then you have his -2, return target creature to its owner's hand. Just not hard removal like the others, but it definitely slows down our opponent. It makes him recast it, things like that. Then we have his ult. You get an emblem. Whenever an opponent casts his or her first spell each turn, counter that spell. For those of you not familiar, there is a commander that has that effect on it in Magic, and he is banned. So next, we have Kaya the Inexorable from Kaldheim. New card. 5 mana, +1, put a Ghost Form counter on up to 1 target non-token creature. It gains, when it dies, return it to its owner's hand, and then you make a 1/1 white spirit with flying. Not really the reason we run it. We can put it on, like, Atraxa if we need to, just in case she dies, but we're mainly running it for her -3, exile target non-land permanent. Slightly better than Vraska's the Unseen, but since it's exile, but again, it's still extremely good. And then we have her minus effect, which is kind of unique. -7, you get an emblem with, at the beginning of your upkeep, you may cast a legendary spell from your hand, from your graveyard, or from among the cards you own in exile without paying its mana cost. Now, all of our Planeswalkers are legendary. That's just a great way to have good recursion, so even if they die, they are in our hand, or even if they get exiled somehow, we can still get them back with Kaya and cast them for free. So next we have our utility Planeswalkers. These are kind of ones that are going to be our main card draw, they're going to be our main just kind of shenanigans, and just general control and card, card advantage. So starting off, we have Teferi, Master of Time. You can activate his abilities whenever you could cast an instant on any player's turn. Super ridiculous effect for a Planeswalker, but continuing on, you +1, draw a card, then discard a card. Looting every turn is going to be very good, especially when you want to get like Doubling Season or Vorinclex, or really just another Planeswalker. He helps out. Then you can -3, target creature you don't control phases out. Basically, if you're not familiar with phasing out just says that creature just does not exist in the game. It's not in play, it's not in exile, it just for all intents and purposes does not exist until its controller's next turn. Then we have his -10. It's a time stretch. Take 2 extra turns. Now, Teferi goes up fast. At the very worst, think about it. He comes in on your turn at 3. You plus him to 4. Then it goes to an opponent's turn. You plus him to 5, and then 6, and then 7. And then you can always just use his minus to phase out a creature if you're having an issue. Next, Tamiyo, Field Researcher. 1 in Bant. +1, choose up to 2 target creatures until your next turn. Whenever either of those creatures deals combat damage, you draw a card. Really, really good. It's just good card advantage. If they choose to attack you, you just draw a card. If they choose to attack another player, you just draw a card. And if they choose not to attack, that works well too, because now they're just not attacking. Then you can -2 her to tap up to 2 target non-land permanents. They don't untap during their controller's next untap step. So just freezing 2 non-lands. Usually freezing is a creature, but these are 2 non-land permanents. Very beneficial if we have an annoying tap effect, let's say off the top of my head, like a Door to Nothingness effect that says just target player loses the game. We're definitely not going to want that to untap. And then we have our -7, draw 3 cards, and then you get an emblem that basically says you have Omniscience. You can cast cards without paying their mana cost from your hand. Super, super silly. Now, other Tamiyo, the Moon Sage, OG Tamiyo. 5 mana, +1, tap target permanent, doesn't untap on its controller's next untap. So you just freeze one thing. You freeze a permanent, not a non-land. So other Tamiyo taps up to 2 non-land permanents and freezes them. Older Tamiyo kind of taps up to 1 permanent, like a land, say like a Gaia's Cradle, or really any of those big scary lands, let's say like a Nyx, Shrine of Nyx. Nyxos, that's what it's called. So then we have our -2 effect. Draw a card for each tapped creature target player controls. If they're attacking, it's just card draw. You know, if they're like playing a whatever untapped tap effect like a Phanex deck, you're just drawing some cards. You know, an aggro deck, a token deck, you're just drawing cards. Good either way. And then we have her ult. You get an emblem with, you have no maximum hand size, and whenever a card is put into your graveyard from anywhere, you may return it to your hand. Old Tamiyo and New Tamiyo go basically perfect with each other. You have omniscience, and your cards can never go away. So you can consistently cast your instants and sorceries over and over and over again, even your creatures, and just do whatever you'd like with them. And no one can stop it. If you counter it, it goes back to your grave, it goes back to your hand, right? If you don't counter, it resolves anyway, and it's going to keep happening. Then, Narset Transcendent. 4 mana for a whopping starting 6 loyalty. +1er, look at the top card of your deck. If it is a non-creature, non-land card, you may reveal it and put that card in your hand. Majority of our deck is Planeswalkers, Artifacts, Enchantments, and things like that. We're not running many creatures, and we're running 36 land or so. So most likely, it's going to be a hit. And then we have our -2. Whenever you cast your next instant or sorcery spell from your hand, it gains Rebound. Rebound, if you're not familiar, basically means when you cast this spell, exile it, and then on your next upkeep, you may cast it from exile and then put it in your grave. So it's kind of a 2-for-1 on instants and sorceries. And then her just big mean effect, your opponents can't cast non-creature spells anymore. It's just there. And a lot of decks, unless you're playing Gruul, heavily rely on non-creature spells. Next, we have Teferi, Temporal Archmage, for a 6 mana. +1, look at the top 2 cards of your library. Put one of them in your hand and the other on the bottom of your library. So just kind of a good little cantrip. You look at the top 2, you pick one. That's kind of it. And then we have his -1. Untap up to 4 target permanents. So at the very worst, he is kind of a 2-mana Planeswalker if you just play him and then you use his -. And you can be even cheaper if you're untapping like your Soul Ring or your artifacts or lands that tap for more than 2 mana. Just very good in general. Or you can untap your creatures if they already attack this turn or have a unique tap effect. Pretty unique card. Then we have his big -. You get an emblem with, you may activate loyalty abilities of Planeswalkers you control on any player's turn at any time you can cast an instant. So just like Teferi, Master of Time, but now all your Planeswalkers can do that. So next we have Tavish Savat, Doom of Fools, for a 5-mana Planeswalker. You +2 him, create 2 0/1 black Thrall creature tokens, then you can +1 him. You may sacrifice another creature or Planeswalker. If you do, draw 2 cards, then draw another card if the sacrificed permanent was a commander. Now, we're probably not going to be killing Atraxa with it, but it's always an option. Now, the way this card's really supposed to work is, well, you +2 him, you get the Thralls for blockers, and then you +1 him, you sack him 1 to draw 2 cards. Now, the unique thing about this card to mention is that he does also hit Planeswalkers. It's creatures or Planeswalkers you can sacrifice. Now, it's kind of inevitable, but eventually, even in Magic, I'm sure many of you have seen that sometimes your Planeswalkers are just going to die. You can't do a thing about it, and it's kind of obvious on your turn. You might as well just sack them and then draw 2 cards anyways. You know, like, let's say we have a Planeswalker at, like, 1 loyalty. It's way too low, really, to do anything, and we're probably not going to get any good effects from it anyways that are going to be worthwhile. Or most likely, just drawing 2 cards would be a better effect than what we're going to get from it, from keeping it around. So that's why I like Tavish Savat. He's kind of pretty unique like that. Then we have his -10, which is pretty cool. Gain control of all commanders. Put all commanders from the command zone onto the battlefield under your control. Now, at the very least, if every Planeswalker's in the command zone, or just on the field, well, no matter what, you're getting 4 commanders, right? You're getting yours and then your other, whoever else you're in the pod with. And if they're running partners, you're getting even more. So just kind of a cool effect. Just got a lot of creatures. Pretty unique. Not game-breaking or anything or game-winning. It's just kind of cool. So now we have our 2 utility Planeswalkers, Narset, Parter Veils, and Ashiok Dreamrender. These are just kind of meant to be mean and slow our opponents down. So let's talk about them. Narset, each opponent can't draw more than 1 card each turn. This is going to shut down wheel effects. This is going to shut down just basically your opponents popping off with abilities like Greater Good, Skull Clamping, even like Tavish Savat or the Tamiyo Moonsage effects where you're drawing a lot of cards. It just kind of stops them from doing it. And then another good effect with her is -2, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal a non-creature, non-land from among them and put one of them in your hand and put the rest on the bottom. So basically, you're digging 4 deep. You're most likely going to hit a non-creature, non-land card, and you just put it in your hand. Good card advantage, and it shuts down your opponents a little bit. Next, we have Ashiok Dreamrender. Very good card. 3 mana. Spells and abilities your opponents control can't cause their controller to search their library. So basically, no more tutors for your opponents. That's one of the main effects. Now, kind of a bigger reason to run him is he's good grave hate. -1. Target player puts the top 4 cards of their library into their grave, then exile each opponent's grave. Now, this is kind of there to shut down reanimator effects like flashback decks, grave matter decks, things like that. And even if it's not there, looking at the very worst, it is just a planeswalker that says opponents can't tutor, and you can just make someone exile the top 4 cards of their deck, assuming no one else has a grave. That is the worst case scenario. And still, that's just fine to have on a stick. No more tutors, and you just remove 4 cards from the game. Really can't go wrong. So now we have our tutors. We have Arena Rector as a 4 mana 1/2. When it dies, you may exile it, which we will pretty much always do. If you do, search your library for a planeswalker card and put it onto the battlefield, then just shuffle your deck. You just let it die, it's a 1/2, so you're probably just going to block with it, or at least it de-incentivizes our opponents into attacking us with it. Or we can always just like Tavesh Savad it and then sack it and draw 2 cards and then hard tutor a planeswalker. Just straight to the field. That's going to get Ugin, Karn, Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, or really any big thing we need. It's very toolboxy. Next, we have Jeru with Eyes Open for a 5 mana 4/3 with Vigilance. When he enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a planeswalker card, reveal it, and then put it in your hand. He just enters, search your deck for a planeswalker. That's really it. Then, if a source would deal damage to a planeswalker you control, prevent 1 of that damage. So it kind of makes our planeswalkers a little bit harder to kill. It shuts down token decks from trying to kill our planeswalkers more easily. Plus, he's just a 4/3 with Vigilance for 5. That's a hard tutor. Pretty solid. Next, we have Captain Sisay, 4 mana for a 2/2. Tapper, search your deck for a legend or legendary card that's going to hit our legendary creatures, our sorceries, our planeswalker. It's going to hit a lot of things, a legendary land even. And then put it in your hand and shuffle your library. Just a hard tutor straight to your hand. You just can't go wrong. Next, we have Call of the Gatewatch for a 3 mana sorcery. Search your deck for a planeswalker, reveal it, put it in your hand, shuffle your deck. Just short, sweet, to the point. You just get a planeswalker you need. Now, Call of the Gatewatch is kind of an obsolete card, but since we're going to run it because Search for Glory, it's just too good not to. Search for Glory is the card that takes over it. Search for Glory is a 3 mana snow sorcery. Search your library for a snow permanent card, a legendary card, or a saga card. Reveal it and put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. You may gain 1 life for each snow mana spent to cast it. We are running only snow basics. Those are the kind of basics we have, snow basics, just for Search for Glory. So not only can it get our planeswalker cards, but it can also basically get legendary cards. Like again, like just like Captain Sisay, our legendary creatures, our legendary sorceries, legendary lands, things like that. And if we need to, it could also just be hard ramp, like into our hand, 3 mana. We're in a 4-color deck. Pay 3 mana, search your deck for a snow permanent card, which just could be one of the basic lands, and then we put it in our hand. Then we're going to gain 1 life for each snow to cast it. It just completely topples over Call of the Gatewatch. It's just so much more versatile. That's why I put the full art there, just to kind of emphasize it. Next, deploy the Gatewatch. 6 mana, look at the top 7 cards of your library, put up to 2 planeswalker cards from among them on the battlefield, put the rest on the bottom in a random order. We are running just about 18, 19 planeswalkers. If we're going 7 cards deep, the likelihood of us at least hitting 1 of them is very high. Worst case scenario, we just whiff and then we just become sad. But I think the likely case scenario is you get 1 or most likely 2 planeswalkers out of the deal. Going 7 deep, when we're this heavy in planeswalkers, it's not going to be too hard to miss with it. It's going to be very hard to miss with it. So let's get away from planeswalkers and talk about our utility creatures. Deep Close Gate. When he enters the battlefield, double the number of each kind of counter on any number of target permanents. So just like Doubling Season and Vorinclex, when they're on the field, a planeswalker enters with double counters. What Deep Glow Skate is, he doubles up all the loyalty counters when he enters. So he's just like, you play him and then you just ult all your planeswalkers basically right away. He's a super ridiculous card. Next, we have Flux Channeler. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, proliferate. Super easy. Evolution Sage. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, proliferate. So again, this isn't just a planeswalker deck. We have a little bit of proliferate shenanigans with it. Next is Spark Double. Basically, Spark Double enters as a copy of a planeswalker or a creature, except if he copies a planeswalker, it comes in with an extra loyalty. If he copies a creature, it enters with an initial 1/1 counter on it, and he is considered to be not legendary. So you can have 2 of the same planeswalker on the field, you can have 2 of the same legendary creature on the field, and having 2 Atraxas on the field, even if you're not copying a planeswalker, Still kind of ridiculous. Next, we have Shalai, Voice of the Plenty, for a 4-mana flying 3/4, which is an excellent rate. You, planeswalkers you control, and other creatures you control have hexproof. It's just a way to keep us safe from targeted removal. It's a good beater, it's a good blocker, plus we can always pay 6 mana at instant speed or whenever we want to put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control. That's just going to get proliferated by Atraxa anyways, or with our other proliferate effects. Now we have Spike Weaver, one of the classic cards. Summon Spike, 4 mana 0/0. He enters the battlefield with 3 1/1 counters on him. You can pay 2 mana, remove a 1/1 counter from him, put a 1/1 counter on target creature. That's not why we're running him. We're running him for his bottom effect. Pay 1 mana, remove a 1/1 counter from him. Creatures deal no combat damage this turn. So think about it. We're going to be proliferating constantly. We're basically just paying 1 mana every turn to fog if anyone tries to mess with our stuff, right? Just preventing all combat damage because we don't want our planeswalkers to take damage because we kind of rely on them to ult to win the game. He is going to be a tremendous help with all of that. Plus, you're going to remove 1 counter anyway. You're just going to proliferate it right back. Next, we have Kethis Hidden Hand for Abzan 3/4. Legendary spells you cast cost 1 less, which is, again, going to be all our planeswalkers. Exile 2 legendary cards from your graveyard. Until end of turn, each legendary card in your graveyard gains. You may play this card from your graveyard. So basically, it's just an easy way to play our planeswalkers from the graveyard and our legendary cards from the graveyard. Just short, sweet, to the point. It's a little bit of a reanimation in a really roundabout way. Next, we have Crystalline Crawler for a 4-mana 1/1 with Converge. Converge, Crystalline Crawler enters the battlefield with a 1/1 counter on it for each color of mana spent to cast it. He costs 4 mana. We're a 4-color deck. He's most likely going to enter as a 5/5. And he's kind of a free card anyways, because you can remove a 1/1 counter from Crystalline Crawler to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool, right? We're going to proliferate that. He's just going to be a good mana sink. Plus, you can pay 1 to tap him, put a 1/1 on him anyways, just like on your end step. He's just going to be there for mana fixing. He's just good in general, just to have. He's going to get really big really fast, and he's going to hard filter for us. Next, we have Pure Imaginative Rascal and Toothy, just kind of because we're running Pure anyways. So they have partner. When 1 enters the battlefield, you can tutor up the other to your hand from your deck. So we're mainly running Pure. If 1 or more counters would be placed on a permanent your team controls, that many plus 1 of each of those counters are placed on that permanent instead. Well, so it basically says each of our planeswalkers are going to enter with an additional loyalty counter. Each of our basically creatures or any effect that's going to put a 1/1 on it, our creatures are just going to enter with an additional 1/1. Now we also have Toothy. Toothy is a 1/1 4-mana. Whenever you draw a card, put a 1/1 counter on him. When Toothy leaves the battlefield, draw a card for each 1/1 counter on him. So we're just going to start proliferating with him and stuff like that to make him big, and then if he dies, we'll use him as a blocker just for better card draw. Now we have our utility artifacts, enchantments, and miscellaneous. I put miscellaneous because there's a few cards in this list, and I'll point them out when we get to them. But there really just isn't many other spots to have. Unlike other videos, this one doesn't have like a card draw kind of section. It's kind of because it's not big enough to have it, because a lot of our planeswalkers are our main way to draw cards. But regardless, nonetheless, the Chain Veil, 4 mana. At the beginning of your end step, if you didn't activate a loyalty ability of a planeswalker this turn, you lose 2 life. That's really never going to happen. Anyways, pay 4 mana, tap it. You can activate your planeswalker's loyalty abilities an additional time this turn. So instead of activating it just once, you can activate it twice. Oath of Teferi does basically the same exact thing as the Chain Veil, except you don't lose life and you don't have to pay 4 mana each time you want to do it. And he also says when he enters the battlefield, just blink another permanent you control. Very good. They're basically interchangeable. Very good cards. Now we have some Oaths. Oath of Nissa, 1 mana. When Oath of Nissa enters the battlefield, look at the top 3 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature, land, or planeswalker card and put one of them in your hand, the rest on the bottom. And you may spend mana as though we're mana of any color to cast planeswalker spells. Again, we're a 4-color deck, so we kind of do need a bit more mana fixing. Plus, just a 1 mana enchantment that does all that is also going to dig us 3 cards deep and just basically cantrip itself, whether it be a land, creature, or planeswalker. Just good all around. Next, we have Oath of Gideon. He is a 3-mana legendary enchantment. When Oath of Gideon enters the battlefield, put 2 1/1 white core ally creature tokens on the battlefield. They're just kind of there for blockers and stuff. But the main reason, each planeswalker you control enters the battlefield with an additional loyalty counter on it. And that's just good value. Again, we're trying to ult them as fast as we possibly can. And if they're all entering with an additional loyalty counter, it's just going to make it go a lot faster. Next, we have just classic Rhystic Study. 3 mana, whenever opponent casts a spell, if they don't pay 1 mana, you just draw a card. Very good card draw. Arguably one of the best card draw spells in Commander. Next, we have Contagion Engine, 6 mana. When it enters the battlefield, put a -1/-1 counter on each creature target player controls. So you can just destroy a token deck, or most likely just kind of weaken your opponent's field. Then you can pay 4 mana to proliferate, and then proliferate again. We are a proliferate deck. We do need these kind of effects to get our Planeswalkers to ult, because we're not always going to have Vorinclex or Doubling Season or Deep Close Gate to kind of make it happen. A lot of the times it's going to be a slow grind, and that's okay. So because with these effects, it's going to make it go a little bit faster. Then Contagion class, kind of like Contagion Engine's little brother. It's 2 mana. When it enters, just put a -1/-1 counter on one creature. Pay 4 mana, just proliferate once. Just an okay card. You know, it's just kind of there, so we have the proliferate ability on a stick, essentially, because we're going to be needing a lot of it to get our Planeswalkers to get up faster. Next, we have Inexorable Tide for 5 mana enchantment. Whenever you cast a spell, proliferate. Just short, sweet, to the point. We're just going to make our Planeswalkers and our counter abilities go up faster and faster just by simply playing the game. 5 mana is like an okay cost for it, but again, it's kind of necessary for what we're trying to do. Next is Smothering Tithe for 4 mana. Just like Rhystic Study, when an opponent draws a card, that player may pay 2. If the player doesn't, you create a treasure token that can tap and sack for any mana. And that's kind of it. He's kind of like Rhystic Study, just no one's going to want to pay 2 mana anytime they draw. So most likely they'll just be like, you just get a treasure, no big deal. And it's just good ramp for us. Good color fixing, good ramp. Next is this Tezzeret's Gambit. 3 mana, we're never going to pay 4 for it because we can just lose 2 life. Life is a resource unless you need it. But again, it's just going to be 3 mana to draw 2 cards, then proliferate. Just good card draw and a good little proliferate effect for 3 mana. That's a good rate. Now we'll talk about rocks and ramp. Soul Ring, you're an idiot if you don't run Soul Ring. That's all I'm going to say about it. Next we have Felwar Stone and Arcane Signet. 2 sides of the same coin. Felwar Stone is basically tap, get 1 mana of any color an opponent could produce to your mana pool. And then Arcane Signet is just get 1 color of whatever's in your commander identity. So Arcane Signet's going to hit us for whatever. Felwar Stone will most likely be at least a 5, minimum a 3 color hit, most likely a 5 color hit, because we just need our opponent to play like a Tri-Land or a Command Tower or just like a City of Brass, Mana Confluence, whatever. We're golden on it. Chromatic Lantern, land to control, have tap, add 1 mana of any color. You can also just tap, add 1 mana of any color. Again, we're in a 4 color deck. We need to have this kind of fixing. It's kind of necessary. Next is a weird one. Astral Cornucopia, XXX. Astral Cornucopia enters the battlefield with X charge counters on it. So at the very least, it's got to be 3 mana for it to do anything. We could just pay it for 0 and just have it on the field, but really no point in doing that. So we'll pay 3 mana. Then it says tap, choose a color, add 1 mana of that color to your mana pool for each charge counter on Astral Cornucopia. Now the cool thing about it is we can proliferate these charge counters. It's going to go a lot faster. So yeah, first it may be 3 mana to only tap for 1. Then we'll go to our end step with Atraxa. Now it's going to tap for 2 next turn, and then 3, then 4, then 5. It's just going to be a big rock that's going to grow exponentially. Then we have Kodama's Reach and Cultivate. They're basically the same card. Kodama's is Arcane. There's really no difference. Arcane's really not relevant in Commander unless you're playing like a weird Kamigawa Spirit Tribal, which I don't really think anyone is. And if you are, please send me a deck list. They each just say, search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, reveal those cards, and put 1 on the battlefield tapped and the other in your hand. Again, 4 color deck, just good fixing, helps us get our colors. Now here's our non-Planeswalker removal. Like, when I mean non-Planeswalker removal, I mean our removal that isn't done with our Planeswalkers. We have Cyclonic Rift. Don't even read the first mana cost. Cyclonic Rift is a 7 mana instant that says return each non-land permanent your opponents control to their hand. Just, unless you're really in a pickle, you can cast it for 2, but most likely you're just going to do it on someone's end step to win the game. Cyclonic Rift is a ridiculous card. Next, Merciless Eviction. In my opinion, the best nuke in all of Magic. Choose 1. Exile all artifacts, creatures, enchantments, or planeswalkers. You just get rid of whatever's bothering you right now. You're going against an Enchantress deck, no, all enchantments gone. You're going against an artifact deck, they're all gone. Token deck or aggro deck, get those creatures out of here. And worst case scenario, someone like Mindslavers us or Worst Fears us, they take our turn, exile all planeswalkers, we just shed a tier. That's kind of it. But again, that's the worst case scenario. Most likely, it's just a card that's just going to get rid of whatever we want. It's so good. Next nuke is Time Wipe. 5 mana. return a creature you control to its owner's hand, then destroy all creatures. The creatures we're returning to our hand are either like Atraxa, Deep Glow Skate, Jeru with Eyes Open, just anything with big ETB effects that we can get good value with. And then we'll just get rid of the rest. Urza's Ruinous Blast, legendary sorcery, so we can tutor it up with Sisay, we can tutor it up with the Search for Glory, the Snow card. So you can only cast it if you control a legendary creature or planeswalker. We're most likely going to have one of them. We have a lot of legends in this deck. Exile all non-land permanents that aren't legendary. That's most likely going to be like our opponent's entire board, except maybe like their commander and another whatever. It's super, super silly. Now next is Settle the Score, a weird card, 4 mana sorcery, exile target creature, put 2 loyalty counters on a planeswalker you control. Now normally I don't like to run sorcery speed removal like that unless it's a nuke, but since it does put 2 loyalty counters on a planeswalker you control, that could be the difference of just ulting a planeswalker either right then and there or having to wait 1 or potentially 2 whole turn cycles. And either way, if it said destroy, we probably wouldn't run it, but since it is exile, it's just pretty good. Plus, no one's really going to expect it. Next, we have Anguished Unmaking for 3 mana, instant, exile target non-land permanent, you lose 3 life. You just permanently get rid of something you really don't like for 3 mana and 3 life, and then you also get to look at the cool art of Sorin just killing Avacyn. Next, we have Wrath of God, just a classic nuke, destroy all creatures that can't be regenerated. Regenerating is really not even a thing in Commander unless like you're playing against Troll Tribal. And again, I wouldn't really worry about that. Just 4 mana, destroy all creatures, can't go wrong. Next, we have Supreme Verdict for basically the same thing as Wrath of God, except it requires a blue and 1 instead of just the 2 colorless. It can't be countered, and then you destroy all creatures. Again, just uncounterable nuke, you can't go wrong with it. So we have utility lands. The one gripe I have about them is they're all colorless, except with Interplanar Beacon, but that's a unique case. But the utility is too good with them to not have. So for Nesting Grounds, tap to add a colorless, pay 1, tap it, move a counter from target permanent you control onto another target permanent, and only do it as a sorcery. So the cool thing about this card is we can basically move a loyalty counter from one of our other planeswalkers to a planeswalker we already control. So we can make them ult just a little bit faster if we need to, or if they're just 1 away or whatever. It's just super, super good value. Next, we have Karn's Bastion. You just tap it, get a colorless, and also just like Contagion Engine and Contagion Class, pay 4, tap it, proliferate. Again, just a good proliferate on a stick card. Now, Interplanar Beacon, whenever you cast a planeswalker spell, you gain a life. Pretty good, you know, little fun utility. Tap to add a colorless, or you can pay 1 and tap it to add 2 mana of different colors to only cast planeswalker spells, which is really good because we're in a 4-color deck and a lot of our planeswalker spells are 2 different colors. And the cool thing about this card is if you look at like Nesting Grounds and Karn Bastion, realistically, it's not going to be 4 mana. It's going to be 5 mana because you're missing out on a potential mana that the land will generate to do the effect. This one just covers itself. It covers its own cost. You pay basically you pay 1 mana, but you're getting 2. So just net even. So just some non-basic lands, pretty generic. We have Command Tower to get whatever we need. Exotic Orchard is the same kind of logic with Felwar Stone. Like most likely our opponents are at least like we're gonna get 3 colors from it, most likely, and if not more. It's just gonna basically tap for whatever we want that's gonna enter untapped. Then the only triomes we can run are Indatha and Zagoth. They're just fetchable if we need to. They enter tapped and they also just have cycling. So if we get them late game and we really don't need them, we just get them out of here. Then we have the classic OG Tri-lands, which is Seaside Citadel, Arcane Sanctum, Opulent Palace, and Sandstep Citadel, just to get all the 3-color lands in. It's okay if we're a bit slow. We are kind of a slower deck, and that's all right. Next, Mana Confluence and City of Brass. They're basically interchangeable. They basically both say, when you tap it, lose a life, add 1 mana of any color to mana pool. Mana Confluence is a little bit better for very niche situations. Let's say an opponent has an Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth on the field. City of Brass will still make you lose life or take damage when you tap it, and then Mana Confluence will not because you're paying the 1 life as an effect to generate any mana, so you wouldn't have to worry about that. Looking at our basics, we're running only snow basics. We have 6, 6, 5, and 5. If you look at the graph in the top right, we will see that primarily we are white and blue heavy. We're not super black heavy and green heavy, but with what we have, our average CMC is 4, so 36 lands plus our artifacts is just going to be just about right to keep us going. So thank you guys for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe the video. I love doing these videos. Let me know which commander you want me to do, and I'll just build a list and I'll put it up. Again, thank you guys for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Again, thank you very much, and have a great day.